Snow drifted across the mountain road like a slow-moving river of white, blurring the world into silence as Mark Ridley gripped the wheel with hands that trembled from more than cold. 60 years behind him, widowhood newly carved into his bones, and the echo of his children's voices still ringing. "Dad, this isn't working anymore." He replayed the words like a punishment, each repetition striking deeper than the last. 8 months since Claire's passing. 8 months since he had carried her frail body to their bedroom window, just once more so she could see the garden she loved. 8 months since he had watched her close her eyes for the final time. Grief had settled into him like a winter that refused to leave. Tonight, after the argument, it seemed to harden into exile. He had driven aimlessly for hours until memory nudged him toward his late Aunt Alina's house, a place he hadn't seen in decades. As the headlights pierced the deepening storm and the old manor finally rose into view, it stood like a forgotten sentinel of his childhood, a place he hoped might hold answers, or at least a quiet corner where sorrow could stretch its limbs without judgment. When he shut off the engine, the silence wrapped around him, heavy and absolute. Mark whispered into the cold, "Claire, I don't know who I am anymore," before stepping toward the door of the only place left that might remember him. Inside, the house breathed with the dust of decades, its air carrying the subtle perfume of furniture polish, old paper, and secrets sealed long before he was born. Mark moved as though walking through a memory he didn't fully trust, lifting ghostly white sheets off chairs, running fingers over shelves lined with Alina's untouched books, pausing at photographs that froze time in sepia tones. His aunt had always been the quiet presence in the family, kind but distant, her eyes filled with stories she never told. Tonight, those stories felt restless. A flicker of instinct led him upstairs, where an ornate desk sat beneath a window that caught the faintest threads of dawn. The top drawer resisted, then surrendered, revealing a leather-bound journal with pages pressed flat by the weight of years. Alina's handwriting flowed with the elegance of a bygone era. January 3, 1943. Today I reported for duty at the 45th General Hospital. Mark felt the air shift. He read entry after entry, about battlefield wards, long nights lit by lanterns, the terror of air raids, the fragile triumph of saving a life with too little and too late. Then came the name, Lieutenant Jonathan Whitmore. The tone changed. So did Alina. It was unmistakable, the tender bloom of two souls finding each other amid the ruins of war. Mark sat back, stunned. His reserved, solitary aunt had once loved fiercely. He whispered, "Alina, what else were you hiding?" The house seemed to answer with a quiet, expectant stillness. Sleep abandoned him as he devoured the journal through the night, following Alina and Jonathan from makeshift hospital tents to letters exchanged across oceans, to a shared dream of a home, a future unwritten but imagined with devotion. When the final entries shifted to grief, Mark felt it like a punch to the chest. Jonathan's sudden death, a training accident mere weeks before their reunion, shattered her world. As morning light crept across the bedroom, he realized Alina had not simply lived quietly. She had lived after breaking. Yet she had carried on with a fierce gentleness, turning Jonathan's death benefits into decades of anonymous giving. That revelation alone would have amazed him, but another discovery waited. A letter addressed to him, written in her steady hand, guided him toward a locked east wing door. When he found the key with the blue ribbon and opened that forgotten room, time folded. Here, Alina had preserved a world no one else had ever seen. Photographs of her and Jonathan lined the walls. A wedding dress lay unworn in a cedar chest. Their letters, hundreds of them, were bundled with string as if she expected to open them again. Mark stepped inside slowly, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the space. It wasn't a room, it was a sanctuary of love suspended in time. In that moment, he realized what Alina had bequeathed him wasn't merely inheritance. It was a legacy of courage, devotion, and a challenge she knew he would one day face. For days, Mark lived between past and present, drifting through Alina's world and letting her unspoken lessons seep into his bones. Her journals revealed an inner landscape of compassion and sacrifice. Decades spent lifting strangers through crisis, refusing recognition, pouring every quiet breath into acts of service born from grief. He found records of medical bills she paid, scholarships she funded, families she carried through darkness without ever revealing her name. The more he read, the more the house felt less like a relic and more like a heartbeat, steady and generous. Then the final truth arrived. Alina had left everything to him. Not because he was the last heir, but because she saw in him a reflection of her own crossroads. a person standing between unbearable loss and the possibility of life after it. In her final letter, she urged him not to repeat her greatest regret, mistaking loyalty to the dead for surrendering the living. "Don't seal yourself away," she wrote. "Claire would want you to choose the world, not the walls." Mark held the letter to his chest and wept, not only for his wife, but for the decades Alina had spent alone when she could have chosen companionship. As her words washed over him, the house no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like an invitation, a path, maybe even a beginning. He reached out to Brian and Denise, not to defend himself, but to reconnect, and their voices, soft, remorseful, human, met him halfway. Their visit transformed the house into something living again. Mark showed them the East Wing, the letters, the untouched wedding dress, the bravery medals Alina never spoke about. Denise stood before a photograph of Alina rescuing soldiers from a burning building and whispered, "We never knew her at all." Mark nodded, feeling the truth settle between them. "Most of us don't know the full stories of the people who raise us," he said. That weekend, healing threaded itself through the rooms like warm air after winter's grip. Apologies were exchanged, not as rehearsed speeches, but as broken pieces finally placed on the table. Mark felt the shift inside him. He wasn't being asked to forget Claire or Alina. He was being asked to live. And so he began. He met with lawyers and activated Alina's dormant charitable commitments, transforming her quiet generosity into an official foundation. He listened to families she had once helped, wrote letters ensuring ongoing support, and watched gratitude ripple outward in ways he had never witnessed. Yet the most difficult step wasn't the paperwork or the responsibility. It was walking into a grief support group and sitting among strangers whose losses mirrored the weight inside him. For the first time, Mark allowed his own story to be seen. The support group became a threshold he crossed every week, its circle of mismatched chairs holding people who shared pain without shame. There he met Helen, an art instructor with silver hair and gentle eyes who had lost her husband 3 years earlier. Her voice carried the calm of someone who had learned to live beside grief rather than beneath it. After each meeting, small gatherings formed at the diner across the street. Coffee cups, shared stories, small laughter that felt like timid birds learning to fly again. Mark found himself opening up, sometimes hesitantly, sometimes with surprising ease. Helen listened without fixing him, without pity, simply offering presence, a kind of balm he hadn't known he needed. Outside of group, Mark immersed himself in rebuilding Alina's gardens, uncovering the secret garden she had tended for decades as a place to talk to Jonathan. He cleared pathways, mended trellises, and imagined spring blooming across the valley. It felt like tending both her memory and his own future. Quietly, without fanfare, the house transformed into something less haunted and more hopeful. One Saturday, Denise invited him to a school fundraiser for a family who had lost everything in a fire. Mark attended, not out of obligation, but out of a growing instinct to show up for others. There, surrounded by the hum of community, he discovered something unexpected. He felt alive. He spoke with teachers, parents, veterans, single mothers, each story revealing needs he could now meet through the foundation. When he offered full assistance to a displaced family, the mother wept into her hands, and Mark felt Alina's presence move through the moment like a warm current. Then he saw a familiar face across the gym, Helen, laughing with students at the bake sale table. Their conversation flowed with the ease of two people who had traveled through pain long enough to recognize courage in one another. As they walked together through the bustling gym, she said softly, "Grief changes us, but it doesn't have to end us." Mark felt those words settle deep. They spent more time together, short walks through town, long talks about art and teaching, quiet evenings sharing coffee on the porch while snow melted slowly into spring. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Just two lives cautiously reaching across the fragile space between solitude and possibility. As winter loosened its grip, Mark realized he no longer woke to emptiness, but to purpose. He had work that mattered, people who mattered, and a heart that, though bruised, was willing to beat forward. Alina's legacy had not shackled him to the past. It had given him the courage to imagine life beyond it. Spring unfurled across the estate like a long-held breath finally released. Mark stood in Alina's garden, now blooming in soft whites and tender greens, the same colors she once planted for Jonathan. This time the space felt different, not a shrine of sorrow, but a living